Okay, so here I am in a Google spreadsheet that contains some information about a variety of New York State bird species. And so you can see as I scroll down, each row is data or information about the individual bird that we're looking at. And the columns include the heading titles that show the different type of data you'll see in that column. So everything from common name and Latin name to habitat, feeding behavior, diet, etc. Additionally, if I scroll further along in my spreadsheet, I have some links here, including a link to a nice little illustration of that bird species, as well as some photos of the bird. And those are just Google Drive links or media links to different JPEGs. I also have a link to an MP3 file that plays the audio of the bird call. And then finally, a simple web link out to the Audubon website on that particular bird species. So you can see it's pretty straightforward. Now, certainly there's no reason I couldn't share this information as is. However, it's not super pretty or user-friendly or engaging to work with. And for example, it's difficult to even see the images. You would have to click on the links to bring them up. And that's not really the best experience. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually convert this simple Google Sheet into a fully functional web and mobile application using no code at all in a tool that's called Glide Apps. Now, I'm going to head over to Glide Apps here. And if you've never used it before, it is a tool that has a free tier where you can build some really robust, powerful apps. In fact, what we're building today is about as simple as it gets within Glide. The beauty of Glide is that you don't have to code anything. You're essentially pulling data from a spreadsheet, whether it's a Google Sheet, an Excel sheet, or even a simple CSV file. And in fact, you don't even need to start with data. You can start with a blank app and have the app populate your data over time. But that's for another video. For today, we're just going to dive in and start creating a new project. And we will call it New York Birds. And then it asks me how I want to start building. Now, the truth is it doesn't really matter. My final product here is going to look good no matter what device I'm looking at it on, whether it's a small phone or a large computer monitor. This is more asking what environment do I want to do the building in. And I typically like to build on a larger screen, so I'm going to select that and click Continue. And now I have to select the source for my data. And as I mentioned, you can use things like CSV files, XLSX files, regular Excel files, Google Sheets files, Airtables, or you can start with just a built-in Glide table and add the data as you go. Of course, my data for my birds here is in Google Sheets. So I'm going to select that and click Continue. And right away, I see all of my different Google Sheets come up from my drive. And I'm going to select the correct one and we'll be ready to go. Now, Glide Apps is really smart, and so it's going to look at my data and attempt to start building an app, and it actually gives me a pretty good starting point right here of what my app can look like. Now, before I do anything, let's take a quick overview of the kind of editor layout for a moment. So up here in the top left, these are the different pages that make up our app. And so you can see this right here mirrors this page we're currently on. And then there's also a users tab, which mirrors this page right here. Now, the truth is this app that I'm building is purely informational. It's public. It's essentially nothing more than a website. So I'm not going to be utilizing the users page at all. So I could go ahead and right click on it and delete it altogether, or I can just hide it from view and go back to my main page. And you'll see it doesn't show up anymore for me. Down below this navigation area, we have my components section, and these are all the elements that make up my page. And if you hover over any of the elements, it highlights it on the page. So you can see this thing that they're calling a collection, that is showing each of these cards, which represent each row in my spreadsheet. And so you see it's pretty smart. It recognized that I have some image links. It took my bird name as well as the Latin name, and it created these cards. And it looks pretty good, but I think we can improve on it quite a bit. So that's the left-hand side. This, of course, is the viewing area. And I can switch between a phone view and a tablet view, so I make sure it always looks good regardless of device. I can also go full screen to preview whenever I'd like to. And this is a fully functioning app in here. So if I click on things, I can actually see what's going to happen. And we are going to control all of that as we build this out. On the top of the page are my three main working areas, and they're broken down into data. And that's actually the data that's populating the app. So these are all of those rows that were built in from my connected Google Sheet. And you can see that right here. This is the table. And you can have multiple tables if you want, and they can all actually speak to one another. But for this app, we're going to keep things pretty simple. You'll see Glide has automatically generated another table here for my users. But again, I'm not really worried about that for this particular app because it's going to be public and free with no real login or anything. So I can actually add additional data right here in Glide by clicking on the plus button and creating a new column. And there are lots of different types of columns with calculations and even integrations with things like OpenAI and ChatGPT and Pexels and various other things. So you can create some really powerful data-driven apps right here in Glide. But I don't really need to do that for this example. One thing to point out, though, if I were to add additional columns in Glide, they write back to my Google Sheet. So it's actually a two-way street here where if we edit the data in Glide, it will update the sheet. If we edit the data in the sheet, it will update the app. So it's a really nice two-way street there. The Layout tab is where we began. This is where you actually configure and build your app. And then I have an Actions tab, and this is where you can build really powerful kind of if this, then this statement actions for your app. So, for example, if a bird lives in this habitat, display it in this color, and play this sound when you click on this button, and send an email and copy this information. So there are really endless actions that you can use in building your app. We're not going to go into those in this particular video. But just know that that is there as a feature. And then finally, over on the right, I have my settings panel and my publish button, and we'll come back to those in a moment. Below here on the right-hand sidebar, these are all of the details for the component that you're currently editing. So if I click on my collection here, that is referring to all of these cards. And the way I can format these and kind of change the layout and what data is displayed and all sorts of stuff is by using my options over here on the right-hand side. And we'll see more about that as we dive into it in a moment. For now, what I want to do is hop over to the settings panel, and I want to make some changes to my app real quick so that it's starting to look more the way I want it to. So you'll see the first settings option is name and icon. And of course, I can upload a custom icon, but for now, I'm just going to use one of the built-in options and bring in a little bird icon. And you can see my name of my app is called New York Birds, and I have some more options for kind of description and what is visible and so forth. Then I can jump down to the appearance. Now, I think that Glide has just the right number of formatting options for you to get started with. You can choose an accent color, and I'm actually going to choose a nice green color to work with here. And then I can choose things like where is my navigation going to show up? Now, right now, my navigation is over here on the left-hand side. I actually prefer the top navigation. I think it looks better. And then I can go a little further and control things like what the colors look like. So I have the accent color, or I can go with just a very plain light colored app or have a dark toolbar. I'm going to go with light colored for this. I'm going to leave these two icons checked so that icons show up and labels show up. And then for the body background, this is the color behind the cards. I'm going to switch it to neutral. And you'll see it gives me this light gray color and it makes my cards white. And then finally, I'm going to make my width of my app smaller. I want it to be a narrower app. And so, good, you can see we've already really started to customize this. And we're going to go a little bit further soon. But for now, that's a good start. Then I'm going to go to the Privacy tab. Now, this app, as I said, is going to be a fully public app, no sign-in. So I'm going to switch it from private to public. And I'm going to switch the sign-in to no sign-in required. And then this way, I can just share this as a link, and it essentially acts like a website. Anyone can access it, so forth and so on. Just know, though, that you can have fully private or password protected or sign-in required apps, and there are lots of options for configuring that. Heading down, you'll see lots of other settings that we could explore, but I don't really need any of those for now. So I'm going to head back to my Layout tab, and we can start tweaking our app here. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit my collection a little bit. So I'm making sure that the collection is selected over here on the left. And now I can come to the right-hand side, and I'm going to make this a little wider so we can see it better. And I can go right down from the top and kind of tweak the appearance. So right now, it's called, this particular page is called New York Birds CSV because that's what my Google Sheet was called. So I'm just going to get rid of that CSV. And in fact, I'm going to take the title off altogether because I don't need the title up here and here. So I'm just going to leave it off altogether. When I come down, I can change the style of this collection. So right now it's in the card style, and you can see all of my cards here. But I could switch to a grid, which has a slightly different look, a list view, a table view, in this case a checklist view, and there are actually quite a few other options depending on the data you're working with. You can do maps and calendars and all sorts of different types of data layouts. But I'm going to stick with the card, and I'm going to come down. And so items data, this is where we start mapping the data from our spreadsheet to the cards themselves. So each card has 4 potential items on it. It has a title, and that's what you see in bold. It has a description, which you see underneath. It has meta text, which would show up right above the title. It's nothing here now. And then it has the image, of course, on the top. So I'm going to simplify mine a little bit. I don't think we need to see the Latin name. So I click on this drop-down, and you'll see I have every column from my spreadsheet here. So I can make any of that information appear as the description. So, for example, I might want description there, and you see the text from the description column shows up. Now, that doesn't look so good because it's fairly long text, it's a little irregular, and it just doesn't give you a good look. Plus, there's no real reason for me to have the description on this main page. So I'm actually going to turn this description off altogether by selecting Custom. And if I turn Custom on, I can either type something in like this, and that will show up for every single card, or I can just leave it blank and nothing will show up. And so I think that actually looks best right now. Now, finally, the image. Right now, Glide is pulling these images from my data sheet in the photo number 1 column, which you can see it's actually been combined right here into this photo column. But I don't want to use that. I want to use those illustrations that we saw. So I'm going to change this from photo 1 to illustration. And I think that looks a little bit better. So I'm going to stick with that. And then the next section has to do with how the cards are designed. First being size. Right now they're small. I want them to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to switch it up to a medium. I think that looks pretty good. That gives me 4 across here. And just to point out that this is responsive. So if I were to make the window smaller, you can see it goes to 3, to 2, and so forth. I can control how my image looks. Does it fill or does it fit? I'm going to leave it as fit. I think it gives it a little more space. And I know that my images are all squares, so I'm going to switch it to square, but I can change it to very small or narrow, but I'm going to leave it square here. And then orientation, this is an up and down or a vertical list. If I had a lot of data that I was showing, I might switch it to horizontal, and then it gives you this kind of carousel look, which is really cool and really helpful in some cases, but I don't think it makes sense for this app. So I'm going to go back to vertical. And then finally, the title style refers to this box up here. I have a choice of bold, which gives it the header background color, or simple, which cleans it up a little bit. And I'm going to go with simple. I'm looking for a nice, clean, basic app here. Finally, I can control how many items show up on a page and how many are showing all together. I want all of my items to show, so I'm just going to leave those as is. Now, my next option over here, if I scroll back to the top of my right sidebar, is to click on Options. And here I have all sorts of really powerful features. So remember I mentioned we're not using users in this case, but if we did have users, you would be able to set this so that the data or the cards were only visible to certain people, maybe certain people with privileges like admin privileges or something like that. So again, you can create really full-featured apps with this. I'm going to leave it just as is for now. Filtering the data allows me to show only the rows of my spreadsheet that meet certain criteria. So just to show you what I mean, I can add a filter, and then you'll see I get this pop-up, and I could say common name includes the word American. And you can see if I do that, it automatically filtered it out to these two particular species. So it's really powerful. You can display basically all you want to display, or I'm just going to remove that so we see everything. I can sort my cards in a variety of ways. I want to sort it by common name from A to Z. So we'll leave it like that. And then if I want to, I could group them. So I could group them according to, I don't know, what their habitat is or something like that. Now, that won't work really well with this particular data, but if I had a different type of data set, I could use that. Now, finally, we have this search bar, which is great, but in this case, I only have, 10 or 11 items that are showing. So there's not so much data that I need a search bar. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that, and you'll see it disappears. And then finally, we can add a filter. And so the filter is really kind of neat because you can filter by whichever column you want or by multiple columns. So we can actually filter by, I don't know, let's say diet and migration patterns. And so if I click on that, I see all my different diets. And then I can also see, I can minimize that and see all my different migration patterns. Now, again, this doesn't really work for this app because my data is mostly in the form of sentences and paragraphs. So it doesn't make sense. But if you had something like colors or sizes or something like that, then these filters can be very powerful. I, again, am making a simple app here, so I'm not going to use them. So I'm just going to X them out and they disappear. Now, we have one more task to do before we move on to the next step, and that is to disable this add button because I don't want anyone to be able to add additional rows to this content. If I were to leave it on, let me show you what it does. I can actually click on it and it opens up a little form that I can fill out, and that would actually add a new column to my data or a new bird to my collection, which is great. You can also make it so that that add button is only visible to certain users, like admin users, for example. So it can be very powerful, but it's not something I want to use in this particular app. Along with that, as a side note, if I hover over each of the cards, you'll see these three dots, and they allow me to edit that column, or rather that row. So I can click on this, and it brings up a form with all of that bird's information, and I can change it right in here in the app, and it will change it on my spreadsheet. But again, I don't want to have these features turned on for this app. This is more of a static app that once it's built, it's built. So the way I can get rid of that is by heading over to my Actions tab, and I'm going to enable Advanced Actions. Okay, and I'm going to remove the title bar action. This is the title bar. The title bar action is the add action. So I'm just going to hit my little trash can here, and that goes away. Okay, now also the collection items, that's what I see when I click on the three dots here, and I can see it says show edit screen. And again, I don't want to have that, so I'm just going to click on it and delete it. And so now it's very clean, this app. There's no overlay icons. There's no ad, no search. Very simple. So that brings us to the next thing, which is, well, what's going to happen when we click on one of these cards? So I can tell you right now, by default, when you do an item click, it will show the detail screen for that item. So let's go ahead and click on the American oyster catcher. And here's what we see. Glide has done its best to take the data from the sheet and summarize it, make it look nice on this page. But of course, I can totally customize everything that appears here. Just to point out, I can go back to my main page and click on a different bird, and I'll get the details for that bird. So what we're going to do is define what one of these pages looks like, and then it will appear that way for all of them. Okay, so I'm just going to pick one, click on it, and you'll see all of these components are shown over here in the components. And I can edit each one individually, add more, remove them, etc. So the first thing I see is the breadcrumb. So the breadcrumb is right at the top. That's this here. And that's what allows me to easily get back to my main page. And so I actually do want to leave the breadcrumb on, at least for now. I might change it later on. Beneath that, I have this title component, which shows the image and the name and the Latin name. And then below that, I have fields, which show all of the different data. And so you know what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to get rid of everything, and we'll just start from scratch. All right, so now I have a blank page. Before I go any further, I keep seeing this .csv. So I just want to come up here to this page and just quickly rename it, get rid of that CSV, and so now it looks a little better. Okay, so to continue where we were, I'm going to click on my bird, and now I need to start building out this page. So I'm going to start with a simple component. So all I did was click on this plus button, and I can see all these different components. So these are all different elements that you can add to your page and then customize by tying them to your data and changing their appearance. So I'm going to pick a simple title. And so by default, it's showing the name of the bird, the Latin name, as well as an image. And so it's selected. So over here on the right, I can customize it. And you see I have a few different styles, a larger one, this kind of cover image style, or kind of a centered style. And I actually like the centered one for this particular app, so I'm going to leave that. And I want the title of the bird, or the name of the bird here, and the Latin name to be beneath. I do want to change my image to that illustration, though. We're going to use the photos later on, but for now I'm going to change my image to the illustration. And finally, my size can be a little smaller, so I'll make it compact. I don't really have to change anything else. That's good to go. And so you can see if I come back home, any bird I click on, we will see that bird and its title component. All right, so now down beneath that, we're going to start adding some content. So I'm going to come back into my collections. Now, there are a million ways to do this. It all depends on what you're looking for. What I think looks nice is to use these containers. So I added a container, and my container doesn't have anything into it. Container's just like a box that can hold other components. So in this case, I'm going to add a text component, and you can see it right there. And this text component right now is just using custom text, which you see over here, but I don't want that. I want to actually pull from one of my columns in my table there. So I'm going to click on the status column, and you can see it's showing the status data for the cerulean warbler. Now there's one more visual thing I want to do, and take my container, and I'm going to change its background to this card because I think that looks kind of nice. Now, finally, there's one more thing. I want to have a little heading in here so people know that this paragraph is about the status. So I'm just going to click on this little icon to duplicate the text. And the first one, I'm going to change it to custom, and I'm going to write status in. And then I'm going to change it to meta text, and it will look like that. So it gives me a nice little header with my text. Okay, so now I'm just going to duplicate that container multiple times for each of the columns in my data sheet. So I'm just going to click here to duplicate it, and then I'm going to change the text, what it's pulling from, and so forth. So I'll just give you one more example. This next one will not be status, it will be habitat. And then I have to make the little header say habitat. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of my data. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay, so you can see that I've added a card for each of the paragraphs or columns in my data table, and I've changed all the titles. And so my app is starting to look pretty good. There's one thing I want to change. I want to move the one that's called description up to the top because I think that should be the first one we see. So I'm going to come over to my side here and find the description container, which is this one. And all I have to do is just drag it up in my list here. And I should be able to get it up at the top where I want it. Let me just get it all the way up. And there we go. So it's as easy as that to just drag and drop your components around. And we have a pretty nice looking app here. Now, there are a couple more things I want to include. So let's say right under the title here, I want to include my images. And I have 2 images for each bird. So I want to add a new container right under the title. And I'm going to click on that container, and you'll see over on the right-hand side, I have some layout options. Now, I want my 2 images to be side by side, so I'm going to click the columns here, the 1x1 columns, and you'll see I have the ability to add an image here in the first column and in the second column. So I'm going to go click on Insert and find my image component, and then I'll do it again and find my other image component. And so I just need to format that. Now, my first one, if I click on it, is pulling from my photo 1. And then I want my second one to pull from my photo 2. So it's a different photo. And they look pretty good. The only thing I want to do is click back on my container and make sure that they're aligned up to the top. Maybe I'll put them in a card. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. And if I want to, I can actually add also a text box. And just like all the other ones, I can just give it a little title called Photos and make it meta text. And so now they all look really nice and consistent. The only problem with that now is that this is not aligned properly because my photos are pushing this down. So let me see if I can go back to this format, and that looks pretty good. Now, the next thing we want to add, if you recall, is I had 2 more pieces of information that I haven't used yet. And the first one is the audio file, the MP3, and the second is the Learn More link on the Audubon site. So let's start with the audio. I have a component that will allow me to play an audio file. It's right here. And I'm going to come drop this in. And you'll see that the Glide is smart enough to recognize that it's an audio player, and it puts it right in there. And I just need to tell it where to find the audio file from. So I need to go down and set it to the audio link. And you can see we now have a player here. Now, just for consistency's sake in the visuals, I'm going to put this in a container as well. And I'm just dragging it in. And I'm also going to give it a title. Let me just grab a text component, and we'll call it Bird Calls. And we will change it to meta text. And there we go. So now the only other thing, I want to give it that card background just for consistency. And now it looks like that. And so this is fully functional playing audio. I will play it right now. And there you have it. So the final thing I have is the link to the Audubon website. So the way I'm going to add that is by adding, I think, a button. And so we're going to come in here and grab a button component and put it right up here at the top. And there you can see it. It's right across the front here. And so this button is going to take you to the Audubon website. And so I need to format it a little bit. So I'm going to come over to my settings on the right-hand side. And you'll see I have some different options for how it looks. I think I'll leave it as basic. I'll leave it as an auto width, centered. And I will go into the actions here. And I want to change it from saying go to learn more. Okay. And then I'm going to give it a little icon. Let's give it a link icon so people know it's a web link. And then we're going to tell it what we want this button to do. So right now it's set to show a notification. So if I were to click on this, we see a little notification on the bottom, but we don't want that. We want to change the action from a notification. You see, I have all different actions. We want to open a link. So I'm click on that. And then I have to say what link. So I'm going to tell it to get the link from my link column of my data table. And so now if you click on that link, it takes you out to the Autobahn website. And so this is a pretty good layout for the app so far. I think I might change that button a little bit. Maybe I'll make it wider. Do I want it to be a title? A tile. Yeah, I like it as a tile. So I'm going to leave it as that. No, I'll go back to basic. And so I like it like that. And then I'm going to scroll down. You can see my app here. Now, at the very bottom, I want to add another button. I want to allow users to share this page. So I'm going to click and select another button component. And you can see it's all the way at the bottom there. And I'm going to change the way this one looks. We're going to make it a tile. And we're going to make it an auto width and put it on the right-hand side. And then for the action, we're going to change the text to the button to share. I'll just leave it as share. And then I'm going to make the icon a nice share icon. And then for the action, we're going to say share link. And the data is we want to link to the current screen. Okay. Oh, so it's telling me I have to have a row ID in my data. So let me come back to my data. And I'm just going to add a column for a row ID. And all that's going to do is add a random identification number to each row. And the reason Glide needs that is so that it can generate a link to each piece of data within the app. So now if I come back to my share link to current screen, should be good. All right. And so my app has this nice share button, so it's easy to share. Everything looks good. So the only problem is there is no easy way to get back to the main page. You could click on the title, but that's not super obvious for the user. So I could either use that breadcrumb component or I can have a back button. So let's see what a back button looks like here. So let's go create a button and I'm going to put it at the very, very top of the page. Okay. And you can see it right up here. And we're going to make it look better. I'm going to do a minimal button with an auto width. And we'll align it left. Or maybe I want to do a tile or basic. Let's do basic. And I'm going to make it a less obvious button. And we're going to change the text to go back. And we'll give it an arrow left for the icon, so people know what it's doing. And then for the action, we're just going to say go to tab, and it's going to go to the New York Birds tab. So it looks pretty good. You click on it, takes you back to the main page. There we go. The only thing I might want to do is switch it to minimal. I think that looks a little better. It's a little more subtle. And so there we go. I've created this app. Let's preview it in a full screen here. If I'm at my home page, I have all my different birds, and I can hover over them and click on them. And if I click on them, I get my title component with my Learn More link that takes me out to the Autobahn website. I have my bird calls, which are playable. I have my photos and then all of my text. And then down at the bottom, I have my share icon, which will allow me to share this page with others, with AirDrop and Mail and so forth. And so now all I really need to do at this point is go ahead and publish this. Before we do that, let's just take a look on the mobile view and make sure it looks good on mobile. And it does. You see the images stack. Yeah, everything looks pretty good. So I think we're ready to publish this. So I'm going to click on the Publish button in the top right. And here's where I get to customize the URL. So I'm actually just going to make it ny-birds. We'll see if it takes that. And it does. Great. So now the URL for my app is going to be ny-birds.glide.page. And once I click Publish, this will be live online. And we'll be able to visit it. and you see I can visit the app, copy the link. I have a QR code here. I can invite people, all a bunch of good stuff. If I did want to, I could use a custom domain, but there's really no need to. Let's go ahead and visit the app, and you can see here it is in the wild, and it looks pretty good and seems to work pretty well. And so that's how you do a really simple build of creating an app in a half hour or so without too much work. So hopefully this was helpful. I definitely encourage you to check out Glide. It is a fantastic tool, super powerful, and you can create some really cool stuff. So thank you for watching and enjoy.